In this lesson, we'll be learning about bryophytes. But first, let's remind ourselves what a plant is. A plant is a multicellular eukaryote that has cell walls made of cellulose. It develops from a multicellular embryo and carries out photosynthesis using chlorophyll A and B. Also, a plant needs a way to gather sunlight, to collect water and minerals, to accomplish gas exchange, and to move water and nutrients. And as we go through this lesson and as we go through the summary at the end, we'll see that bryophytes fit all of these characteristics and they accomplish all of these things, and that's what makes them plants. So finally, we are on to true plants. And this is the definition of what a bryophyte is. Bryophytes have life cycles that depend on water for reproduction. Lacking vascular tissue, these plants can draw up water by osmosis only a few centimeters above the ground. This means that they are relatively small. They are low-growing plants that live in moist, shaded areas. So let's look at some examples of what bryophytes are. The most common example of bryophytes is moss. And maybe you've seen some moss in low, shady, wet areas. Here's another picture of moss. But there are also less common bryophytes. One is called a liverwort, and another is called a hornwort, and we'll discuss each of those. But first of all, let's discuss what vascular tissue is, because bryophytes lack vascular tissue, meaning they don't have it. So maybe you've heard of xylem and phloem before. Those are vascular tissues. They are tissues in plants which are used to transport substances up and down the plants. So if in this diagram over here, xylem is used to transport water up the plant, and phloem is used to transport the sugar that the plant makes through photosynthesis down the plant to the other cells that need it. These are specialized tissues that have these jobs of transportation, and bryophytes don't have this. Because they don't have them, they rely solely on osmosis to transport water to the top of the plant. This limits their size. So xylem allows a plant to be able to grow really tall because it's the specialized tube that draws water up the plant, so plants can be tall. But because bryophytes don't have this tissue, they cannot draw water up very far because gravity eventually overcomes it. But they can draw water up through osmosis, and so they rely on that to get osmosis from the bottom of the bryophyte to the very top. But osmosis isn't super powerful, and so this limits the size of bryophytes. Because bryophytes lack vascular tissue, they do not have true leaves, stems, or roots. So if you look at this diagram over here, we don't call these leaves, we call them leaf-like structures. And they don't have a stem, they have a stem-like structure. And they don't have roots, it's called a rhizoid. Vascular tissue is what makes a stem, a leaf, and a root. And because they don't have these, we have different names for them: stem-like structure, leaf-like structure, and then a rhizoid. Also be aware that bryophytes do not have seeds. We'll talk about seeds when we get a couple phyla down the road with plants. Not all plants have seeds. And in this case, bryophytes reproduce using this little capsule inside their spores, and so they reproduce using spores. So our first phylum is phylum Bryophyta. Bryo means moss and phyta means plant. So this is a moss plant. And the common name for this phylum Bryophyta is mosses. So be aware, bryophytes are the group we're discussing, and within that there are three phyla we're talking about, and Bryophyta is one of them. So these are mosses. They grow abundantly in areas with water, and their leaf-like structures are only one cell thick, so they dry out very quickly. So there have to be in areas where there are lots of water so they don't dry out. Plants need water in order to photosynthesize, and so they need to be in an area where they won't dry out so they can photosynthesize. They can tolerate lower temperatures, which means they can survive where other plants cannot, so you can find them in fairly cold places as long as it's wet. So here are some pictures of some mosses, some bryophytes. In this top left-hand picture, we see the reproductive structure, the stalk with the capsule, and it contains spores, and that's how the mosses spread. So here in this picture we see that mosses grow in moist, dark, shady areas, so the base of a tree and a dark forest is perfect. Here the mosses are covering rocks and almost completely all the soil. And in this picture I just wanted you to get a glimpse at the size of a moss. They cannot grow very tall at all, maybe a few inches off of the ground, but they are limited because they don't have vascular tissue. Our next phylum within the bryophytes is Marcantiophyta, and these are the liverworts. That name, scientific name, is really hard, so hopefully you can just identify it by what it looks like. I'm not going to ask you to spell it or anything like that, but it's phylum Marcantiophyta, and these are the liverworts. They look like flat leaves attached to the ground, and sometimes the leaves resemble the shape of a liver, and so that's why they're called liverworts. And generally they're only found in areas that have damp soil year-round. They really rely on that water surrounding them in order to survive. So here's liverworts. Here's the shape of their leaf-like structures. They are flat, growing very close to the ground, and this is their reproductive structure, and this is how you're going to differentiate between liverworts and hornworts. In liverworts it has this almost green umbrella type structure. There's the leaf type structure down below that photosynthesizes, and then this is the reproductive structure here. The last phylum within the bryophytes is phylum Anthoceratophyta. And again, that's a mouthful, I could barely say it. So just recognize that this word means hornworts. That's their common name. They resemble liverworts, except the reproductive structure resembles a horn, so hence the name, and they also survive on year-round damp soil. So here's phylum Anthoceratophyta. Here's the leaf-like structures growing very close to the ground, very flat, and here's the reproductive structures. Here's a close-up of the reproductive structures, so they are hornworts. They're not those little green umbrellas, and so this is how they reproduce. So why are bryophytes plants? First of all, if you look at them under a microscope, they are a multicellular eukaryote. They're made of many cells, and their cells have nuclei, one nucleus per cell. Their cell walls are made of cellulose. So that was a big point in the protists. Not a lot of those cell walls were made of cellulose. So that's the big thing here. Bryophytes have cellulose. They develop from a multicellular embryo, and they carry out photosynthesis using chlorophyll A and B. So again, that was different with protists. Some protists use different photosynthetic pigments, but here all plants use photosynthetic pigments A and B. Also, bryophytes have a way to gather sunlight. They have those leaf-like structures. They collect water and minerals using the rhizoid, or the root-like structure. They accomplish gas exchange through their leaf-like structure, and they move water and nutrients using the properties of water themselves, osmosis. So in summary, we have bryophytes, we have moss, which is phylum Bryophyta, we have liverworts, which is the Marcantiophyta, and then we have the hornworts, which is Anthoceratophyta. They are seedless, they lack vascular tissue, and they're very small due to their need to be able to transport water up the plant, and so that limits their size because they don't have that vascular tissue. So that is our first group of true plants, the bryophytes.